Whenever I tell people that I went to a mixed martial arts event at the Playboy Mansion, I get one of two reactions. Men, generally, take on an expression of shocked jealousy, while women give me a wink and a laugh as if we share some kind of hidden secret. The assumption people make, I guess, is that I took part in some kind of pool party orgy. Honestly, though, that couldn't be further from the truth. What really happened that night was nothing along those lines, and the memory fills me with a what the kind of feeling. Sure, it was fun, but it was also very weird. It all began when I saw a job ad in a local paper years before, looking for a mixed martial arts reporter. I was already writing for quite a few different publications, so I saw a chance to add one more to my list of employers. Little did I know, this job was for Bodog, the gambling empire owned by lunatic millionaire Calvin Ayre, and they were looking for a full-time writer to send around the world to report on their sponsored mixed martial arts events. Needless to say, I was all on board for that gig, and the Playboy Mansion was just one of the crazy places they sent me, along with a pancrase event in Japan and an 80cc World Submission Wrestling Championships in New Jersey. Each place they sent me was memorable for a different reason. And the Playboy Mansion event was certainly a night to remember. Just not for the reasons most people think. My clothes stayed on the whole time. There were a few things going on, though, that made it very strange. First of all, the crowd was a mix of fighters, celebrities, Hells Angels, and assorted Hollywood types. So the vibe was kind of freaky, as if 3 or 4 different buses had collided and thrown together a mix of people who, under normal circumstances, would never have met. This happened due to the fact that tickets were $1,000 each, and 1,000 tickets were sold. I imagine many were comps, complimentary tickets given out for free. I got mine for free, and I imagine all the fighters got in for free, and their corner men. The rest were bought by rich people who worked in either the film industry or movies or drug smuggling. Why were we at the Playboy Mansion? Well, sadly for Playboy, their magazine was no longer the cash cow it once was. Thanks to the internet and the proliferation of online pornography, nudie magazines saw a massive sales drop. One way that Playboy dealt with this was by renting out the mansion's backyard to whoever wanted to host an event. Of course, it being the Playboy Mansion. Various people were interested. The next night, a convention for the drill bit industry was scheduled. And, thanks to the venue, what would have normally been a lame work function had now become a prestigious social event. I suppose Strikeforce had the same idea in mind, and with Bodog sponsoring the event, they wanted to put together something cool and have it happen somewhere quite nice. And that's the first thing that struck me when I arrived. The Playboy Mansion actually wasn't that nice. Really, it isn't that surprising when you think about it. Consider, an old man who made millions years and years ago by publishing nudie magazines And now, to make ends meet, he has to rent out his home. Sound like a swag party pad? It wasn't. Actually, it looked more like a haunted house. Up on the hill, surrounded by old trees, in desperate need of yard work. In the backyard, behind the huge old brick house, there was a pool, which had been partially covered with something like brown paper mache to give it a kind of a cave-like appearance. This was the world-famous Playboy Mansion grotto, known as the site of many sexual encounters. Looking at it, though, I imagined any hot tub, even a hot tub in an old age home, would be infinitely more hygienic than this one. Although we weren't allowed inside the house itself, I looked in through a ground floor window. Like the outside, it had an interior that was old, out of fashion, and sort of creepy. As if it was the home of an old rich pervert who had lost touch with reality. There was old wallpaper, shag carpeting, and framed paintings on all the walls. Again, not unlike a haunted house, but, I thought, with everything coated in who knows what. A CSI ultraviolet light would make the whole place light up, I thought. And I didn't bring my hazardous materials suit, so I was glad we were outside. On that note, I was curious about what was allowed and what was prohibited at an internationally notorious den of hedonism. So I asked a security guard, "What are the rules?" He replied, "You can have sex anywhere on the grounds." To which I responded, "Even if I'm by myself?" He didn't laugh. Perhaps the most unexpected thing about the night was the fact it was almost all men in attendance. Aside from a few women who'd been brought by rich film tycoons, it was all middle-aged men, most of whom had come with the idea that they would be surrounded by women. To see that it was a sausage party was a huge letdown and put a lot of people in a bad mood right from the start. Really, though, should that have been a surprise? Playboy is, after all, a men's magazine, so the mansion isn't exactly a magnet for women, unless they're being paid, and there were a few women being paid to be there. By my count, there were maybe a dozen Playboy bunnies. Most of them were being chased all over the yard by men who showed up expecting a lap dance, if not more. But 2 Playboy bunnies were tucked away behind some hedges, standing by a big chair, posing for photo opportunities. I didn't miss my chance. It was a not-to-miss opportunity. And that was the other bizarre thing. Even though it was a high-priced, mixed martial arts event, most of the people there had no interest in watching the fights. Instead, the crowd was mostly schmoozing by the bar or splashing around in the grotto. I think many people were just there to be seen. It was a huge trend I noticed in the upper echelons of Hollywood, as people would want others to see them in the finest places. Earlier that day, I'd gone for lunch at a restaurant known for celebrity spotting, and I was quite surprised at how the most famous people got the most in the open tables. Almost as if privacy was a curse. Dog the bounty hunter showed up and was given the table right in the middle of the room, where he could not be missed. My coworker went to get his autograph, but was turned away by his security. I guess you could look, but you couldn't talk to him, or even get too close. At that same place, the tables were so close together, you couldn't help but talk to the people who were beside you. I met a couple who had made a fortune in real estate and apparently spent a lot of it on plastic surgery. When the woman heard I was a sports journalist, she said, "You need to change your specialty. The money is in writing movies." The see and schmooze factor was in full play later that night at the Playboy Mansion. While some of us were in folding chairs around the cage, most others were in the business of shaking hands and making connections, or at least being seen at the party to inspire hot gossip. It would be useless to spend their time seated next to me, the lowly journalist, since I was totally unable to advance anyone's career. Still, who was sitting next to me? Movie star Michael Clark Duncan from The Green Mile, among many other films. Next to him was a film director, and next to that guy was Joe Rogan, who was giving fight betting advice to the director, who was betting on the fights with Michael Clark Duncan, who was asking me for advice about who to bet on, since I was a journalist covering the fights. Michael Clark Duncan kept winning $2 each time, thanks to my tips, and he was delighted. Joe Rogan was very stoned, and his advice wasn't so useful. We were all having a good time. Sitting in front of us, in the front row, was Hugh Hefner and his 3 wives. Was he legally married to all 3? Pretty sure that's illegal. Also, I'm pretty sure this was all part of a see and be seen kind of thing, like I was talking about earlier. From my vantage point, right behind them, it seemed clearly as if they were each helping each other maintain some image and some sort of symbiotic relationship that very likely was not physical. Hefner himself looked a bit like Gollum and walked all bent over like a hunchback. But when any cameras appeared, though, he straightened up and stuck out his chest like a champion decathlete. I guess keeping up appearances is a big thing in Hollywood. For that reason, sitting right behind him wasn't such a good deal, since the handful of women who'd come to the mansion had their hearts set on having their picture taken with Hugh Hefner. I guess that happens when a man is famous for being seen in photos with sexy women. Women, then, want their photo taken with that man, which means they must be sexy. The only problem was that I was trampled quite a few times by women in high heels, as the front row was cut off on both sides by security, and the only unguarded path was over my lap. Thankfully, the Hef only came out for a few fights and left with his 3 wives pretty quickly. Oddly, a butler brought them milk and cookies to enjoy while they sat and watched the fights. Yeah, milk and cookies, like the snack you leave for Santa. It was just one more thing that seemed odd and a bit wrong, as if it's not wrong enough to have 3 wives who are 1/3 your age. But then to share milk and cookies with them while watching fights? That's weird in many ways. And that wasn't by any means the end of the weirdness that night. Besides the location and the crowd, even the fights themselves had a strange quality, with most of them being curiously lopsided. Nearly all of them ended in either the first round knockout or they were 3-round unanimous decision beatings. But the main event was the one that nearly caused a riot. And what a crazy riot it would have been, considering the crowd. Fighters, gangsters, celebrities. Besides Joe Rogan, Michael Clark Duncan, Hugh Hefner and his 3 wives, Sylvester Stallone's brother was there, and Gary Shandling, and Hoyce Gracie, and Bob Sapp, and Uriah Faber, and Frank Shamrock, and Hanato Babalu Sobral, and lots of Hell's Angels. Imagine a backyard brawl breaking out with those people. It would have been like some weird hallucination, but real. And that nearly became a reality, thanks to the strange way the last fight ended. One of the fighters had had his vocal cords removed or some kind of surgery, so he could only whisper. And he got hit in the ribs on the ground, and then he said to the referee, "Stop, stop," in a way that almost nobody could hear. And he didn't tap with his hand. He just quietly said, "Stop, stop," to the referee. That gave the impression that the referee had ended the fight unfairly. This did not sit well with the Hells Angels, who'd been enjoying the services of the complimentary backyard bar for some time. This is when things began to turn ugly. Actually, a growing feeling of dissatisfaction had been building all night. I remember one guy in a huge fur coat, smoking a cigar, who spent the whole night photobombing everyone and flipping off the bird at the cameras. Why was he doing this? Maybe it was the mostly male crowd, the long line at the backyard bar, or just the odd vibe that was in the air that night. Whatever the reason, he wasn't the only person acting sour, and the confusing way the last fight ended seemed to be the final straw. People began to boo and angrily shout, even those who weren't watching the fights, and it looked for a moment like things were going to dissolve into chaos. I'll never forget seeing a wild-eyed Hell's Angel with his arms around a terrified and confused Gary Shandling. Sensing a turn in the vibe, Hefner and his 3 wives left their milk and cookies and went back into the mansion. Then, security quickly ushered everyone to their vehicles in order to clear the backyard. Considering the potential crazy scene that could have erupted, it was the right move. It felt strange to be leaving the Playboy Mansion when the night was still young. Part of me had expected to be there into the small hours of the morning, but an early end to the night was fitting. After all, it had been a weird night in every other way. So, why not end it in a strange way? Thinking about it now, I realize why it was such a perplexing night. Because everyone has this idea of what the Playboy Mansion is like, and really, it's nothing like that. Still, I look pretty happy in this photo, don't I?